In the early 1500s, a heated theological debate had captured the continent of Europe. Meanwhile, on the island of England, a king was also looking to amend his relationship to both his wife and the Pope in Rome. What were the actions by a king and his daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, that led to the establishment of the Church of England? What were the theological insights and traditions that came out of this reform? And what is the legacy of the Church of England, put on powerful display most recently with the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II? We are talking all things English Reformation on today's episode of Theology on Air, part of our series that is looking at the Reformers. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran here in Midtown. Sarah Stone is with us, as always, from Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church. And we have another member of our leadership team, Patrick Hall, who is rector at Church of the Epiphany.
That's right.
Episcopal Church on the southwest side. And if you don't know, the Episcopal Church, they used to be called the Church of England, but I don't know, for some reason in America they changed their name.
Yeah, there was a little period of time where it didn't play well.
Okay, yeah. Maybe you wreck around, I don't know,
1780s.
yeah, gotcha. Well, HoustonTOT.com is where to go to learn more about Houston Theology on Tap. Come to our live events every other month. Just go to the website and learn more. If you have listened to all of this series so far, we want to thank you for that as we move forward in this really 300-year era of church reformation that kind of will give us a pretty good background of all the significant church traditions that we have. But let's just sort of dig in. The English Reformation. First thing I would say is that we talk about the Reformation. Well, there were many Reformations, and there are many traditions within the Reformation. I mean, there are four big ones. You get the Lutheran, the Calvinist, the Church of England, and then the Anabaptist. But then you have the Catholic response, all of which we'll cover. But really, you have Reformations for different reasons at different times, and so on and so forth. And mostly when people think about the English Reformation, they think Henry VIII and a divorce. But I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that, and there's certainly a lot that happened after that. As a Lutheran, I can say Henry VIII was, interestingly, a real opponent to Martin Luther in the early 1520s. So just to put this in the calendar, we're talking, Henry VIII and Luther were contemporaries. So, but maybe just kind of give us kind of some background. And by the way, we did do an episode on John Wycliffe, who was English.
Great.
This is 140 years or so before.
Yeah, he's super important.
Yeah. So just jump in wherever you like on the timeline. If you want to go back to the dinosaurs, even, that's cool too. Just anyway, wherever we should kind of pick up this story, of the Church of England and Reform and England and all that.
Well, so I think the place to begin the story of the English Reformation is this 30-year period of English history that we call the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses is interesting because it actually formed the basis, I believe, for the Game of Thrones.
Oh, funny.
So the historic events that Martin drew on to write the Game of Thrones was the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses was an extended 30-year period of civil war in England, fought between two rival families who claimed the English throne. And it also roped in, of course, Ireland. Scotland was involved in the War of the Roses. All of the various royal families on the continent had some stake in the War of the Roses. And it was extremely bloody and a very ill-remembered period of English history. And the War of the Roses ended when Henry VII, who is the father of Henry VIII, defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. So with that defeat, Henry VII was the first of what we call the Tudor monarchs of England.
Oh, yeah.
So he established the reign of the Tudor monarchs of England in 1485 when he won the Battle of Bosworth Field. Now, Henry VIII was obviously the son of Henry VII. And Henry VIII was married as a young man when he was still the Prince of Wales and the Prince Regent, was promised to a woman named Catherine of Aragon because the Tudor monarchs in the Kingdom of England was in alliance with the newly formed Kingdom of Spain. So you had Ferdinand and Isabella, who everybody remember. They united the monarchies of Spain into one household, and they were allies of Henry VII. Now, the reason this was very important is that Scotland was allied with France.
Okay.
And so Scotland and England were enemies. Spain and France were enemies. And so Henry wanted to cement the alliance between England and Spain. And the way that you did that in those days was through marriages. So the first thing to understand about marriage in this world for royals is that marriage was a political tool. That was its primary reason for being. And so before Henry VIII was even, I think, 13 or 14, he was pledged to Catherine of Aragon as a means of trying to strengthen the alliance between Spain and England.
I just want to say to all the guys out there who are not very romantic, all of marriage was about political alliances at one point. So.
Right, or land. I mean, no matter what status you had in society, the notion of marriage as a romantic endeavor is extremely new.
Yeah.
I mean, like 19th century new. For most of human history, marriage was about what I tell couples, I call it the not-for-profit business side of running a household. That's why you got married. That determined who you married. And so
Such a romantic, this guy.
Well,
hey, I'm glad to have someone on my side on this one for once.
Yeah.
There's more to marriage than love, is what we're trying to say.
Than the feeling of love. Yeah. So anyway, so Henry VIII is married to Catherine of Aragon, and that marriage is not a great match. And the primary reason that marriage is not a great match is because one of the fundamental purposes of the monarchy, especially after the War of the Roses, is to maintain the political stability of England. And one of the things that made this marriage problematic is that Henry was not originally the heir.
Oh,
so Henry VII's first son was a man named Arthur. And so Arthur was first betrothed to Catherine of Aragon.
Okay.
Arthur married Catherine of Aragon.
Twist.
And then Arthur died. Now, there was a rule in canon law which said that levirate marriage, which is the practice of marrying your brother's widow, was verboten by canon law. It was prohibited by canon law. And so for Henry to marry Catherine, the Pope had to issue a dispensation. In other words, saying, okay, I'm going to allow this law to be set aside so these two people can marry. But that was not particularly persuasive. There were questions about whether the Pope could actually set aside this law, whether it was within his authority to issue this dispensation.
I thought no one questioned the Pope at this point.
No, at this point, the Pope was
down in polls.
Was the weakest because of the Reformation.
Yeah.
The Pope was the weakest that the Pope had ever been and had become subject to political authorities. And this plays into the story later.
By the way, canon law is church law.
Church law.
Yeah.
Canon law means church law, which now is
what year are we in? Like 1525-ish?
Yes.
Something like
that?
Yeah,
okay. Somewhere in there. I don't know. I don't think I wrote down the date that they were married.
So you definitely had some activity going on the continent. And
yes.
And this whole time, too, you've got
1520s
this
would be where we were.
Turkish invasion that's sort of always bubbling on the surface. And and so like Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor at the time.
And he figures into this story.
Okay.
Because the Pope at this point is under his authority, essentially. I mean, it used to be that the Pope told secular rulers what to do, but with the Reformation, what's beginning to happen is the Pope really needs those secular rulers who are going to continue to keep their countries Catholic. And because of that, the Pope has to basically do what they say.
My, how the tables have turned.
Yeah. Very quickly.
Yeah.
So the Pope issues this dispensation allowing this levirate marriage to take place, but it still remains stigmatized in the eyes of the English people and the eyes of really all of Europe. And then Catherine of Aragon cannot give Henry a male heir.
Now, has she given Arthur an heir?
No.
Okay. So.
No, they're only 12 at the time.
Because if that had happened, Henry wouldn't have become king. If Arthur had a son, then there would have been a regency, and Henry wouldn't have become king. But because Arthur dies without an heir, Henry becomes king.
Still no heir.
And he cannot issue a male heir. And at this point, this is soon to change, but at this point, a queen cannot take the throne. So you have to have a male heir for the line to continue. And so Henry, keep in mind, we're like 30 years out from the War of Roses.
Yeah.
So very much on people's mind, the 30-year period of incredibly bloody political instability that preceded the rise of the Tudor monarchs. So the fact that there is no male heir is a legitimate, profound political crisis. And so Henry is panicking.
Oh.
He goes to the Pope to try to get his marriage to Catherine annulled, so that he can marry someone else who will end up being Anne Boleyn, with the hope that that woman will be able to give him a male heir. These annulments happen all the time.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been that uncommon for the Pope to grant this annulment, except that Catherine of Aragon's nephew is Charles V, who is the Holy Roman Emperor. And Catherine appeals to Charles and says, do not let the Pope do this, otherwise I will end up dishonored.
Oh.
And so Charles tells the Pope, no, you're not allowed to grant this annulment.
Man, we need like a whiteboard for this.
Yeah.
This is intense.
So the Pope slow plays the issue, but eventually goes back to Henry and says, no, I'm not going to grant this annulment. Well, Henry at that point is like, well, literally the political stability of my kingdom is in danger.
Yeah.
And so what he says is, well, we're going to be a Reformed church now. So the key thing to understand about this move is that Henry, as Evan alluded to, was a staunch conservative Catholic. He had been declared by Pope Leo X defender of the faith because of the pamphlets that he was publishing against Lutheranism and against the Lutheran Reformation on the continent. So Henry was not moved to establish a Reformed church in England because he was a staunch believer in Lutheran principles.
Right.
He was like,
it was the escape plan.
this is what we got to do, right? We have to generate an heir.
Yeah.
There's got to be a Prince of Wales. I got to do whatever it takes to get a Prince of Wales. And so he convinces Parliament to break with Rome, and he is appointed the head of the church in England. His closest clerical, meaning priestly advisor, is a man named Thomas Cranmer.
Okay.
And but prior to breaking with Rome, he had already leveraged the Pope and forced the Pope to appoint Cranmer Archbishop of Canterbury.
We've heard that role a lot, that office a lot.
It's the most central in the world of the English Church. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the most important ecclesial role.
And we mentioned before, but there was the Treaty of like 1213, for example, where the king wanted to appoint the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Pope wanted to appoint his guy, and there was a conflict, which led to the excommunication, and then so that led to the Treaty of 1213, where England was basically given to the Pope. Anyway, and then in the days of Hus, it was the Pope was saying you still have to abide by this, and the Parliament now by this point is saying no. You know, a lot has changed since then. You know,
and this is the interesting thing to remember. And we saw some of the stuff on display when Elizabeth died, but the outline of what we call British constitutional government already exists at this point, and it's actually a pretty interesting system that doesn't have any kind of corollary anywhere else on the continent. So you already have the notion of the monarch having to share power with Parliament. And that becomes incredibly important for why the English Church and the English Reformation proceeds in the way that it does.
And it comes in handy for the king a couple of times, ironically perhaps, because it seems like he's like, what are you going to do? You know, I got this Parliament to deal with. And hey, because again, 1215 is Magna Carta. It took the Pope annuls that. 50 years later, it's actually put into effect by that king, whoever he was in like 1260 something. And so then, the Parliament has real say.
They have tremendous say.
Yeah.
The king or queen can put forth a legislative program, but it's up to Parliament to pass it. And if Parliament doesn't pass it, it doesn't pass. And so this form of like kind of give and take constitutional, even though Britain has never had a written constitution. It's important to say that. There is no written constitution in Great Britain. It doesn't exist. And so, but this basically the Constitution is a set of traditions that are handed down.
Yeah.
Common law.
Yeah. And so Thomas Cranmer is Archbishop of Canterbury. Henry is now in charge of the church. Now, Cranmer was sympathetic to the Reformation. We talked about John Wycliffe. He had read Wycliffe. He was sympathetic to Wycliffe's ideas, who was a scholastic medieval philosopher and theologian in Great Britain in the 14th century. And so Cranmer was happy about this. Now, Henry was a conservative, so he didn't change anything about the liturgy. He didn't make any changes to the liturgy. He didn't get rid of bishops. He didn't get rid of priests. He didn't get rid of celibacy. He didn't get rid of monasteries. He didn't really do any of that. All he did was he said, anybody who says the Pope is in charge of the Church of England is guilty of treason. Jeez. But other than that, everything stayed the same. Cranmer, during Henry's reign, the one thing he did that was kind of a Reformation move, Cranmer issues English Bibles. So Cranmer is on board with the notion that is so central to the Reformation that people should be able to read the scriptures in their own language. And so he was responsible for the mass publication of the first English Bibles as Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah. Two things real fast. One, the first publication of the King James Bible was like 1609 or
That's
something.
much later.
So that's much later, just to be clear. So this would have been pretty much the Wycliffe Bible.
It was the Wycliffe Bible.
And then the other thing is the Book of Common Prayer. Was that a Cranmer thing?
Yes, but that comes later.
Oh, okay.
So
you're spoiling
I'm jumping
everything.
the gun. I'm sorry.
Well, we're about to get to that. So Henry is succeeded. He finally, Anne Boleyn is able to give him an heir.
Is Anne Boleyn also Spanish?
Sorry, Jane Seymour. No, Anne Boleyn was his second wife.
Right, I know, but I didn't know if he was going to try to keep that tether.
No, he at this point is done with that alliance.
Okay.
Wait, he was done with what alliance?
With Spain,
alliance.
because that's why Catherine
right.
was,
Okay.
So his third wife, who's Jane Seymour, finally gives him an heir, and the heir is Edward the Sixth. Edward was a sickly young boy, and he dies. His reign is not very long. And he's so young when Henry dies that the Duke of Somerset, Edward Seymour, becomes the Prince Regent. So what happened in those days, if you had a very young sovereign, basically you would sort of put the role of sovereign into kind of into a trust that is run by someone else.
Yeah.
And that's called a regency. And so Edward Seymour, as the Duke of Somerset, becomes the regent. Edward is very much enthusiastic about Reformation. He gives Cranmer even more latitude than Cranmer had under Henry. At that point, Cranmer publishes the first Book of Common Prayer in 1549. That Book of Common Prayer is essentially a Lutheran document. But then he publishes a revised edition of the Book of Common Prayer in 1552, and you can begin to see a shift in Anglican theology away from the Lutheran pole towards the Swiss pole. So Cranmer is very influenced by Zwingli, very influenced by Calvin, and you can see that shift begin to happen in the Book of Common Prayer by the 1552 edition of that text. At this point, you can actually say that there is something that is called the English Reformation.
Yeah.
When Henry started the whole thing,
It was kind of a name only.
It was a name only. It was a political move.
Yeah.
At this point, largely through the leadership of Cranmer, you've got an English Book of Common Prayer, which actually begins to delineate a specifically English form of Reformation worship and practice.
Can you give an example of something that might have been different from the Catholic Church, either in the theology or the liturgy?
Sure. One of the big examples is the words of institution at communion.
Yeah.
Right. So
It would have to be.
The Lutheran version maintains the sort of more ambiguous language about what's happening at communion.
All the prepositions, under, over, around.
Well, that's not in the words of institution, but
it's not. Oh, okay.
Right, but then the 1552 version begins to move us towards a more remembrance oriented take on what's going on at the communion table.
Okay.
And obviously, a lot of the energy is going into that that communion office. Of course, the other big thing is what language is the Book of Common Prayer written in?
I assume English.
It's in English. It isn't in Latin.
Yeah.
So through Henry's tenure, the Mass was still happening in Latin. It was a Tridentine Mass happening in Latin.
Okay.
So one of the big changes of the Book of Common Prayer is that the whole service is now in the vernacular.
Okay. It's so crazy that it took so long for that to happen. Most of the people that were going there on Sunday mornings, they didn't speak Latin, right? So they were just listening to something assuming that it was true things being said. I mean,
well, there were bells. I mean, there
were bells.
There were. I mean, the Tridentine Mass, and we still use Sanctus bells often in many Episcopal churches, but there were bells that would ring so that you would know what was happening at that moment. Because not only could they not hear, but in the Tridentine Mass, in the old school, everything was happening behind a curtain. So if you were in the nave, you actually couldn't hear what was going on, but you couldn't see it either.
Yeah. And nothing else, all the altars were rear facing. So even in our church, until the probably even the 90s it happened, but 60s with Vatican II for sure. But every altar was against the wall. The priest would have had his back
to the congregation.
Huh.
It's called ad orientem. And actually, I think there's good arguments for why that's the
absolutely
way.
We need to be going. The Vatican II brought a lot of trash into the church. We need to go back. we need another Reformation.
I'm not going to opine on that, but
I do want to say that first of all, just as a placeholder, like the brinksmanship, like if you actually ever do want to study like political science or the brinksmanship going on with Henry and the Pope is really pretty fascinating. Mm-hmm. So that would be worth. I don't know, really kind of studying, because he called his bluff, right? I mean, that's what the king did. He said, oh, okay, you're not going to give me the divorce?
I'm out.
We're out of here. Other people have paved the way. But the interesting thing is, and I said this with studying Wycliffe, it seems like the English, being on an island, I don't know if geography is history, if that's actually true, but it seems like they have some advantages. And so, for example, they took all of their bishops with them. I'm sure they could have gotten on a boat and crossed the English Channel and gone to the continent and begged the Pope for another reassessment, but that didn't happen with the Lutheran Reformation.
Yeah,
they that does come down.
And geography is so important in a number of ways. One of them is that the English Reformation does not proceed like a crazy wildfire of seditious ideas that destabilizes the entire fabric of society, which is what happens on the continent. The English Reformation, until you get to the time of the Puritans and the English Civil War, proceeds in the same way that everything else in that society did, from the top down. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the major things about the English Reformation, is that there's this level of deep calculating practicality to it on every level. This is not someone whose heart is on fire and they overturn the tables. This is like the king saying, okay, what can we do to secure peace in our country? And I would make the argument that fact of how the English Reformation proceeds is why England avoids the kind of religious warfare that you see take place on the continent. So Edward is succeeded by probably the most important figure in the English Reformation, and that is Elizabeth I. Now, there's also Queen Mary so Edward dies. Mary, who is
wait, this is the sickly child that
sickly
dies,
child. Edward
but he
dies.
had a baby first.
No, he's succeeded by his half sister Mary.
Okay,
Mary is Roman Catholic. She tries to re-Catholicize England.
Oh, Mary!
And all of the
when did a woman be able to ascend to the throne?
It was when
Mary.
Okay,
Mary was the first.
Okay.
Out of necessity.
Oh, okay.
It was the name. They love that name.
There weren't any other male heirs.
Gotcha. I was wondering if they made a change to law or something like that.
Well, they did. Surely Parliament had to make the change to allow it to happen.
Okay. So she's the first. Okay.
Mary becomes the queen. She tries to re-Catholicize England. All of the English reformers escape England and go live in exile in Geneva.
Whoa.
And this is one of the most important changes in the English Reformation, is now all these English reformers are not on the island. They're on the continent, and they're drinking from the fount of the Swiss Reformation. So when Elizabeth becomes queen and all those reformers return to the island, they are way more reformed than they were.
They're in their cage stage of Calvinism.
When they left.
They're making mean posts on Facebook.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth succeeds to the throne in 1558. She had been under arrest by her sister, almost was executed. Charles V was encouraging Mary to execute Elizabeth, but Mary doesn't. And so Elizabeth comes to the throne, and she unrolls it all. She unrolls all the Catholicism. Elizabeth is probably the first Protestant monarch who is a Protestant out of personal conviction, not just out of political necessity.
Yeah.
And the Pope tried to bargain with her about keeping the Catholic. He said, I'll approve of your ascension if you keep Catholicism. She didn't even inform him of her ascendancy to the throne. She was like, completely ignored the Pope.
It's neat to know, and you don't.
Right, exactly. And so Elizabeth establishes what we call the Elizabethan settlement. And this is one of maybe the most important political act in the English Reformation. And it composed it, so she tries to get her legislative program through Parliament, including the piece appointing her as the supreme head of the English Church. Parliament rebels against that plan. There are a lot of Reformed Puritans in Parliament who are not in favor of a woman being the supreme head of the church. And so her legislative program fails. So she comes back a couple years later in 1558 with what comes to be known as the English or the Elizabethan settlement. And there's two laws that Parliament passes that make this happen. One is the Act of Supremacy. The Act of Supremacy says that the Queen is not the supreme head, but the supreme governor. The supreme governor of the Church of England. And that is a title that the English, or now the monarch of Great Britain, retains to this day. So Charles is currently the supreme governor of the Church of England and appoints the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Back to that.
So the Act of Supremacy passes. The second thing that passes is the Act of Uniformity. And the Act of Uniformity says that the 1558 prayer book, which she revises, revision of the prayer book, 1558 revision of the prayer book, becomes the standard text for worship in the Church of England. What's significant about that text is that it is what the word we use in English Reformation world is latitudinarian.
Whoa, that's a word.
The text is very broad in terms of what it allows.
Okay.
So the text allows, you can use the 1558 prayer book if you're a Calvinist. You can use the 1558 prayer book if you're a Lutheran. It doesn't matter what brand of Reformation theology you subscribe to. The prayer book is written to be vague enough that you can use it without feeling your conscience impinged. Right. So the Act of Uniformity basically creates this incredibly wide trench of people who can use this prayer book and worship with it accordingly.
Is that why she pressed for that to pass?
Yes.
Okay.
Because Elizabeth was a brilliant monarch.
Yeah.
And she was reformed, but she was not an extremist about anything. And her primary goal was, how can we create a Church of England that almost everybody in England can use?
Yeah.
So then the other piece of the Act of Uniformity is you have to go to church. Otherwise you're fined. It's a rule. Everybody has to go to church, and if you don't show up, you're fined. So everyone must participate in the Church of England, but the Church of England is made broad enough that pretty much everybody can get in. She adds really the first doctrinal foundation of the Church of England, which are called the 39 Articles. Okay. They are still they're in the American prayer book. They're still in every prayer book today. The 39 Articles basically explicitly reject the premises of Roman Catholicism, but they say nothing about any of the differences between the various Protestant sects.
So, still to this day, there are Anglicans or Episcopalians who will say, I'm on the Wittenberg Trail, or I've heard that, or the Geneva Trail.
Sure.
Right? So it's like, I'm Anglican, but I'm more Lutheran in my theology, or I'm more Calvinist in my theology.
This is the genius of Elizabeth, and the genius of the Elizabethan settlement, and the genius of the English Reformation. Yeah. It trades in doctrinal uniformity and, you might say, doctrinal purity for stability.
Yeah.
Except for all the purists out there who are...
And that's the thing, right? So you have, really, it's the Elizabethan settlement. There are two groups that aren't included. One is the Roman Catholics.
Right.
Though towards the end of her reign, she encouraged and tolerance for Roman Catholicism became normative. So,
really nice.
Don't kill the Catholics, everyone.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
So, but that happens right at the point of the settlement. It can't be Catholic. But eventually, it's like, all right, you can be Catholic.
And she reigned for what?
70 years.
Wow.
No, because that was Elizabeth II.
Yeah.
She reigned for, I think it was between 50 and 60.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Very long time.
Yes. And she plays Kate Blanchett in a movie, I think.
Right, that's how that works.
Her.
Yeah.
That's how that works.
I think you mean Kate Blanchett.
No, I said it that way because I think every movie about Elizabeth, I think Kate Blanchett played Elizabeth twice in two separate movies.
Okay.
If I'm not...
There was this period of time where there were all of these Elizabeth I movies.
Yeah.
I don't really know why.
Funny.
She seems to be pretty important.
Super important.
Yeah.
But
she was the Virgin Queen. She never married, right?
She never married.
Just like
so
Mary.
so no love life. I mean,
well, no, she had her. I believe people presume she had
okay,
her,
okay.
but she never
Things get
married
spicy.
because even at this point, it was if she had married, that whoever she married would have become King of England.
Yeah.
And now we use the term like Prince Elizabeth's husband, Prince Philip was the Prince Consort. Right? But at that point, if she'd married somebody, that guy could very well have taken her throne from her.
Oh, interesting.
So she couldn't marry if she wanted to actually be in charge.
Sure,
she couldn't marry.
So this is a little off topic, but so when she died, who became her successor if she had no children and she kind of would have outlived? But I guess there's some third cousin somewhere along the way that was next in line, right? I mean,
right.
They've got genealogists figuring this out. And
So after Elizabeth. We begin to move into the reign of what are called the Stuart kings. So Elizabeth is the last of the Tudors.
Okay.
So she reigned for 45 years. The key thing to understand, especially as Americans, about the Elizabethan settlement, it creates Puritanism. Puritans comes from pure, right?
Yeah.
Puritans are those Reformed Christians in England who cannot sign off on either the article of supremacy or of uniformity. In other words,
they weren't latitudinous or whatever the word is.
No. In other words, they couldn't abide a queen because they couldn't abide a woman in charge of the church, or they couldn't abide the liturgy of the church, the sort of broad liturgy of the Church of England.
Let's stick on that for a minute, though. I never even thought about that. So when Henry VIII he declared himself to be the head of the church, right? So effectively, the Pope was saying he was the head of the church.
Correct.
Now the King was saying, I'm the head of the church.
Correct.
So that gives rise, that it sort of instantly births the Church of England, more or less. Okay. But it never occurred to me that there would be this issue with the Queen being the head of the church then as well. But if you can't have female priests, how are you going to have
That's why they changed the word from head, right,
to governor. But it remained a major sticking point for a lot of the Puritans. That was a major issue for them. The other thing,
it's semantics.
The other thing to note is that the Reformation, I'm not going to talk much really at all about the Scottish Reformation. The Scottish Reformation goes way further than the English Reformation. Scotland ends up, even today, the Church of Scotland is a Presbyterian church. So right now, the monarch, Charles, is both an Anglican and a Presbyterian because he's the head of the Church of Scotland. He's a church divided in himself. He's the head of the Church of Scotland and the head of the Church of England. Huh. So when the monarch is in Scotland, they're Presbyterian. When they're in Wales, Northern Ireland, or England, they're Anglican.
Wait. You mean like the king today? Like you mean when they physically go to these places?
So Queen Elizabeth, there was this thing that was promulgated. Queen Elizabeth was the first British monarch to die a Presbyterian.
Wow, interesting. Okay, because she's had a home in Scotland or something. Right?
Balmoral.
That's in Scotland.
Built by Victoria. So the monarchs have had a sort of a summer retreat in Scotland called Balmoral since the 1850s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So that is Elizabeth, and if I could boil English Christianity and all of its successors down to one idea, it is the notion, whether foolhardy or not, that you can solve all debates about doctrine or holiness through ecclesiology. You can solve all debates about doctrine or holiness through how you organize the church.
By making it broad enough,
by just messing or tinkering around with how this person relates to this person and this authority figure relates to that authority figure until you've made enough space of autonomy for everybody to continue about their business. That is the driving feature of English Christianity. This is why if you try to name Anglican theologians who have written incredible systematic, church-altering systematic theology, you won't be able to name a one.
Interesting.
Because the most famous English theologian is Richard Hooker, and his systematic theology is called The Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity. In other words, his
if you need help
systematic theology is here is how the church should be organized.
So it's not just a stereotype that, say, the Church of England, highly values the institution of the church. It's
no.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
It believes that the way to solve all potentially schismatic problems in the church
Yeah.
is through tinkering with the institution.
Interesting.
Now, you mentioned this is sort of where Puritans come on the scene. They would not be of that mind.
No.
Right.
So they have to leave England. Is it for fear of their life, or they couldn't worship in freedom, or
is it like taking their toys and?
Well, I think there were a number of migrations,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the circumstances varied depending on which set of Puritans you're talking about. There were obviously there are moments where it's unpleasant to be a Puritan in England, all the way through the restoration of the monarchy, Charles II, in the 1600s.
Mm.
So there are various periods of time where the Puritans might, either as a matter of conscience, right? I mean, so many of them leave because they cannot brook the diversity of the religious diversity of England, and they want to start communities where they get to set the rules, and there isn't any of this having to deal with other parties and the kind of political calculations that are always going on in the Church of England. So you have some Puritans that leave for that purpose, and then others that leave to escape persecution. You have Catholics that leave to escape persecution. I mean, Maryland was founded as a Catholic colony by Catholics who were escaping the Elizabethan settlement and coming to the New World.
And Baltimore, up until the 1970s probably, was a hugely Catholic community. I mean, and it was like the first diocese in America, I think, was in
Pennsylvania. Quakers, right?
Yeah.
The Quakers would have been considered on the extreme end of Protestant.
Is that why we have so many Amish people around Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
There's a connection there, right?
Sure. I mean, the Moravians are not Quakers, but yeah, I mean, they're a similar radical group of Protestants who come here. So yeah, I mean, even if you're not an Anglican or an Episcopalian, the Elizabethan settlement is important because it determines who the people are that decide the risk of sailing to the New World are worth it.
Yeah. And
so much of the puritanical religious underpinning of the early American religious life is an outgrowth, an after effect of what Elizabeth does.
That's really interesting.
So let me ask a controversial question, if I can. And it came up a lot this conversation came up a lot with Queen Elizabeth II's passing, which is, well, actually, maybe this whole colonialism thing was a really bad idea. She oversaw all of this colonialism. I heard other people who argued, if you compare, say, the British colonial experiment with other, even like, say, French or Spanish colonialism, the British colonial experiments were really wildly successful and on the whole, a benefit to those who were colonized. You had countries that sort of had warring factions that sort of came together under British rule. You had the expansion of Christianity through because when Britain colonized, they took the Church of England with them. There was an organizational principle, there was a religious principle that actually brought much of the world together, because you had the Royal Navy, which was the most powerful force in the world, and this incredible, not mercantile in the technical sense, but merchant
class, merchant economy.
Yeah, and so I understand that there are particular evils with colonialism. That probably has to deal with the particular people involved in some cases with the colonial enterprise. But from what I've read, by and large, I would say the colonial experiment. This is an unpopular take these days, but what the British did was, on the whole, probably a very good thing. But anyway, your thoughts on that? Because the Church of England went with them.
It's interesting, even as Episcopalians, you can watch the rise and fall of. So obviously the moment, and is a little off topic for English Reformation, but the moment when the Episcopal Church was the most close to being extinct was right after the American Revolution. Makes sense, right? What happens in the American Revolution is all of the churches, all of her clergy and bishops leave because up until the the American Revolution, to be a ordained person in the Church of England or any of the satellite churches in any of the colonial holdings of England, you had to swear personal obedience and loyalty to the sovereign. And so all of the clergy and all of the bishops escaped to Canada during the American Revolution. And so what you're left with after the American Revolution is this church with literally no ordained people
leadership.
at all.
Yeah.
No leadership. And a big PR problem.
Yeah.
Because it's associated with
right.
these people who we just kicked out of our country.
Right.
Within 100 years, the Episcopal Church is desperately pumping up its British credentials in the 19th century as a means of competing for membership against the Methodists and the Lutherans. So in the 19th century, the Episcopal Church goes to the Church of England and says, we want to create an Anglican communion. We want to be connected to you in some way.
Yeah.
Because we want to be able to say, oh, well, we're not Catholic, but we are connected to this long, deep, Anglophilic tradition of
Let's not
British,
talk about 19...
blah, 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 blah.
70,
and it works like gangbusters.
Yeah.
Because in the 19th century, Americans are going through this Anglophilic period where we're rediscovering the Britishness of our cultural heritage, and people are trying to sort of lean into that and recover it. So all that to say, I think that colonialism, however you think about it, and we are really the first post-colonial country in the United States. That's really we are. Is this double-edged sword. Empires bring with them incredible sophistication, incredible wealth, incredible complexity. Empires can solve technological problems that no other kinds of organizations of people can solve because of the level of specialization and complexity involved in building an empire. On the other hand, there are going to be people who are participating in that empire against their own consent. And there will be moments in histories of every empire where those people are treated with cruelty, treated unjustly, and horrible things will be done to them. And the British Empire, in that regard, is like every other empire. Right?
Yeah.
There are ways in which they brought incredible technological gifts to the countries that they colonized. There are ways in which they, because of the British pragmatic approach to governing difference, was able to bring tribes together that might otherwise have been warring because of the same reason why they were able to avoid the religious warfare of the Reformation on the island, because they were like, well, I don't really care. The question isn't who's right and who's wrong. The question is, how can we get you to live with each other without killing one another?
It's like TOT. That when you said that latitudinous thing, I was like, I think that's what we are.
Yeah,
as a leadership team.
Trying like that urge to say we're going to sacrifice answering the question of who's right and wrong so that we can all kind of figure out how we're going to live tomorrow without shedding each other's blood.
Okay, maybe that's not theology on
that
top,
is,
but
that is an English impulse, right? And you can see that is the same impulse that births Parliament and the relationship between the king and Parliament, right? Europe is like wrestling with absolute monarchies for hundreds of years after England has figured out the constitutional monarchy setup. And England figures that out for precisely this reason, because it's like, well, we want a monarch. We also want there to be democracy. How do we make that work? And the answer is this unwritten British Constitution that perseveres to this day.
But like, but I just think like some of the more famous, like, Anglicans in our own day, like Desmond Tutu, for example. How does an Anglican end up in, he was in South Africa?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like, well.
English colonialism,
so,
the Anglican communion is large. It's not, there aren't very many members in the United States, but it's huge in portions of Africa and in portions of Asia and the Middle East. And the reason it's so large, it just literally follows the footprint of British colonialism.
Yeah.
So where are there large Anglican churches that persist to this day? Wherever the British were in
have
charge.
been.
Yeah.
Let me make a clarification for people listening that maybe don't know this. You're using several words sort of synonymously. So Church of England, Anglican, Episcopalian.
Yes.
Are those all the same thing?
Sort of. So the Church of England, often abbreviated the C of E, the Church of England refers to the church in England.
Okay.
The church in England. Now, what happens as colonialism occurs across the globe is that in a haphazard way, Anglican is the what am I looking? It's the descriptor for Christianity that emerges out of the Church of England.
Okay.
So when you hear Church of England, that literally means the church in England.
Yeah.
When you hear Anglican, that means anyone who is part of a church that grew out of the Church of England.
Okay.
So the Church of England is Anglican.
As well as. But
So are we.
other
So is
Anglicans.
right. So
yeah.
and then Episcopalian is a uniquely American word. It is the word that that Anglicans in the United States settle on during the rebranding phase after after the Revolution.
Yeah.
So they settle on, well, how do we describe our church? If we're not going to describe our church with reference to England,
Yeah.
well, we have bishops.
Okay.
And that's and that is not just a descriptor. That is an important descriptor, because what sets our polity aside is the power of the local bishop. So in Episcopal or Anglican polity, the most powerful entity is the local bishop. So, for instance, in the Diocese of Texas, where we are right now, our bishop is Andrew Doyle, and nobody tells Andrew. There is no one higher up the hierarchy who is able to tell our bishop what to do.
There's no United States bishop and then worldwide bishop.
There's a presiding bishop in the United States.
Okay.
But we call him primus inter pares, meaning first among equals. So he's the presiding bishop because he presides over the House of Bishops. But again, this is the Anglican thing, solving things with polity, solving things with church organization. Yes, we have a presiding bishop, but the presiding bishop cannot tell any bishop what to do if they are the diocesan bishop in their diocese.
Okay.
Right.
And so so there's this, let's say you have a Calvinist strain, right, in the Anglican world. So why are some Presbyterian and some Episcopal? Well, Episcopoi, Greek word, presbyter, Greek word. So, and those are the two words.
Presbyterian comes from presbyter, which is minister or
like elder.
Right.
So often the Presbyterian ecclesiology is going to be elder based, and the Episcopal,
meaning all the elders get together and vote on things.
Right. And you might have a plurality of elders. So you might have so a lot of Reformed churches will have like preaching elders and teaching elders, and sort of different groups of elders and so forth. But so in the Episcopal model, you're going to have sort of a more hierarchical.
But the key thing to understand is that the bishops mean something in the Roman Church, right? The Roman Catholic Church being the place where bishops start. There is a clear hierarchy that goes all the way up to the Pope.
Yeah.
So if you're a diocesan bishop in the Roman Church, you got people you report to.
Yeah.
And they can order you to do things, and you have to do it.
Okay.
In our polity, because we're a Reformed church, we have sort of hierarchy, but sort of not. Right. So one of in the Chicago Lambeth Quadrilateral, it's this document that was signed, written really by Episcopalians during the 19th century. We were trying to create the Anglican Communion. They came up with what they call the principle of episcopacy, but locally adapted.
Okay.
In other words, there should be bishops everywhere, but those bishops should be 100% free to adapt the customs and worship of the church in their diocese to the needs of their local area.
Does that not scare you that then those people will go rogue?
Well,
theologically. But I guess there's a wide tent to begin with, maybe so.
Right, but that's not like a thing that's a purity concern or a doctrinal concern.
Right.
And our answer is always, no, we've solved that by essentially making sure that if they go rogue, you don't have to go rogue.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
If you're in another diocese.
Yeah.
So there is this tendency to solve those kinds of problems through polity.
Yeah. I hear that. Okay.
And so then the other thing that happens, and we saw this during the sexuality debates in the Anglican Communion, which happened in the aughts, no one has the right to kick anyone else out.
Okay.
And so what happened in the sexuality debates in the aughts is you had these ascendant churches in the global south that were the legacy of English colonialism, who very much objected to and opposed the progressive sexuality agenda of churches in the global north, including the Anglican Church in Canada and the Episcopal Church. So they went to the Archbishop of Canterbury and said, by these people, again, a purity concern, right?
Yeah.
These people have broken the law of the gospel, and they should be kicked out. So what did the Archbishop of Canterbury do? He set up a 5-year commission to look at answers for what could be done, about the theological debate in the church. They came up with this document called the Anglican Covenant that was supposed to bind all the churches in the communion together. The Anglican Covenant didn't even pass the Church of England. The Church of England voted it down. Why? Because they were like, we don't want to sacrifice our autonomy to suddenly having to listen to, it's, again, locally adapted. We don't want to sacrifice our local autonomy to, having to listen to what Anglicans and Nigeria think we should be doing in
Gotcha.
Suffolk.
Yeah.
Right. So the Church of England voted it down. And what you saw happen afterwards is everybody just kind of threw up their hands and said, I guess.
Because the first, gay bishop was
Gene Robinson. He was an Episcopal bishop.
He was Episcopal. So that kind of grabbed a lot of headlines.
It did.
Interestingly,
it's always been my understanding the Episcopal Church, quote, split. But you're saying that didn't happen. People are kind of
no. So this is what I'm saying. So our polity again is diocesan. And this is sort of in the weeds. I mean, there's some inside baseball for which I apologize if it's profoundly boring. Episcopal churches don't hold the deed to their property. The diocese does.
Okay.
So like Epiphany, right, where I'm the rector. People can leave Epiphany. I could leave Epiphany. Epiphany can't leave the Diocese of Texas. Okay. And can't take its property with it anywhere.
Yeah.
Because the diocese owns it.
It's a freestanding thing.
So we did have a split in the sense that a lot of people left the Episcopal Church.
Okay.
And they went into these other Anglican denominations that were funded by the Global South Anglicans who were upset about the stuff going on in the U.S. But in part because those same Global South Anglicans have started missionary churches in England.
Oh, funny.
The Archbishop of Canterbury.
I'm a full circle.
Archbishop of Canterbury is not recognizing any of them. Okay. So the one thing you need to be an Anglican church is that you have to be in communion with Canterbury. Okay. And what that means for us is that you get invited to the party.
That's awesome.
In other words, the Archbishop of Canterbury says we're having Lambeth, which is the gathering of all the Anglican bishops in the world. Yeah. And if you get an invitation to Lambeth, congratulations. You are in communion with the See of Canterbury. If you don't get an invitation to Lambeth, you're not in the community.
It sounds like House of Cards, where people are just waiting for an invitation to kind of slide under.
It is, but you saw it. There was a lot of Sturm and Drang. Lambeth just happened this summer, and a lot of members of folks who have left the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Church of Canada and the Church of England over sexuality issues, and they then appointed their own bishops, right? And those bishops were not invited to Lambeth, and it became this thing. So they've now formed a secondary group called the Global GAFCON, Global Anglican Future Conference, which is the center of gravity for that is very clearly in the Global South. And that is sort of now a competing Anglican communion, essentially, to the actual Anglican communion.
So in Houston...
Though there are dioceses and provinces that are members of both.
Oh boy. Again, we need a whiteboard.
Because they're in communion with Canterbury. So they continue to come to Lambeth,
And just real fast, there is a really interesting legal case in South Carolina where that entire diocese left the Episcopal Church. Yes. But interestingly, their argument is that we existed in the 1700s. We existed before the Episcopal Church.
In all of the litigation, and I think the courts made the right call here, in all of the litigation about property surrounding the sexuality stuff, what was unanimously decided by courts is dioceses can leave the Episcopal Church and take their property with them. Individual parishes cannot leave their dioceses. Yeah. Okay. So there were 3 dioceses, South Carolina, Fort Worth, and in Quincy. Maybe there was a 4th. I think there's one in California too. 4 dioceses that elected to leave the Episcopal Church. And in those cases, even though the Episcopal Church sued for control of the property, the Episcopal Church lost those suits.
But this really does put
that's Anglicanism. Universal Episcopate, locally adapted.
Yeah, I mean that really puts an exclamation point on a lot of the issues of the Reformation. I mean, I actually see I would probably be more on the GAFCON side of things, right? I mean, no shocker there. But it does, I think, really force us to examine the worth of an institution if we feel it has compromised on the gospel.
Those are those are so for Anglicans, and there's not even so we also within the Episcopal Church have parishes and dioceses that are on the other side of the sexuality debate from their diocese, and the Episcopal Church has created this complicated thing called traveling bishops, where if you're a church and a diocese and you disagree with your bishop, that bishop will fly in a bishop who agrees with you to do all your bishopy things.
Yeah,
bishopy things.
For example, like St. Martin. Maybe I shouldn't name names, but a very large, prominent congregation in Houston is known as a conservative,
but they have not they do not have alternative primatial oversight.
Oh, they don't. Okay,
no. So they're in good relationship with the diocese.
Okay.
Here.
Okay,
but that's because again, I mean, whatever. More inside baseball. We live in our bishop is very moderate, and his approach to the sexuality debates was the Anglican approach of like, we don't want anyone to leave. How can we give you the feeling of enough autonomy that everybody can exist in the same
But
world?
see, that's
wait. So that's why you can go to different churches in Houston, different Episcopal churches in Houston, and get a different sort of flavor on, say, that front.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, because what the bishop did was he created this system. If you want to do same-sex marriages, there's like a 3-year process that your parish has to go through that's not dedicated to whether it's the right or wrong thing, but whether it's going to destroy your church or not. In other words, the bishop doesn't want you as a rogue conservative rector to say no when all your parish wants to do same-sex marriages, or for you as a rogue progressive rector to be able to destroy your church.
Blow up a church out of
So if you can prove that you're not going to blow up your church by doing same-sex blessings, the church wants to do it, great, you have the authority to do it.
I see.
The alternative for the conservatives was to write into your parish bylaws that there will never be a same-sex marriage at your parish.
Yeah.
And the bishop was like, we'll help you do that if you want to do that. Right. So this is how Anglicanism functions, right? The question of whether something, now we do have, obviously the creeds, right? The Episcopal Church, the Anglican Communion, the Anglican Church subscribes to the creeds, the first 3 or 4 creeds, Nicaea, Apostles, so those theological distinctives are not negotiable.
Okay.
Right?
So there are some.
Right, we're a Christian church, right? So that's not, now I'm not saying everyone in the pews agrees with all of those things, but I, as a priest in the church, I swore to uphold the doctrine of the Episcopal Church, which means those creeds, right? Okay. So anything that isn't covered in those creeds, the Anglican mode of solving this problem is constantly deferring the question of whether it's right or wrong, and instead always asking the question, okay, but how do we still eat together at the same
It really
table?
does remind me of our leadership team for Theology on Tap, because we punt that question sometimes, right? Because we disagree on things. In fact, we're going to be doing a whole series on some things that we disagree on. But anyway, this is fascinating. But you were going to ask something.
Well, probably because I'm a Lutheran. In 2009, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which I grew up in, which I was ordained in, they had a kind of big tent philosophy, right? They passed a social statement that said we respect the quote-unquote bound conscience, which was a horribly abused phrase, which I won't get into, but we're going to respect the bound conscience of people who disagree, but we're going to allow certain churches, if they have a bishop's permission to do, say, same-sex marriages or have a openly gay pastor, et cetera, et cetera. They met this summer. And, of course, conservatives have by then, like me, have left the ELCA. Right. So it's essentially all run by progressives. They repealed, or they're going to repeal, almost certainly, this bound conscience provision. Right. And it's going to become, no. Actually, we don't want you in our church at all. If you disagree with us, you're out. And I think that is where this is going. I think it's inevitable. If the Anglicans can pull it off to where y'all can agree and still stay in one
we're already, we just had our last Lambeth, and it was the watershed moment. Where there had been a number of African bishops who came to every Lambeth pushing for some
certainty, statement. Right?
What the Archbishop of Canterbury has done is there's no voting. He basically canceled voting. So Lambeth happens, but nobody votes on anything. All they do is sit around and talk. And after 15 years of that, we finally got to the place where everybody went to Lambeth and nobody had any energy around kicking anybody else out.
I got you. So, the issue, I think the theological issue becomes, could it be a sin of omission? I'm just asking that rhetorically, right? I'm guessing that's what the bishops in Africa would say is, well, look, if we refuse to do anything, we're equally guilty of not doing anything. But I'm not trying to.
That's Anglicanism was literally built to marginalize the importance of these kinds of questions for good or for ill.
Interesting.
Right? If you are somebody that wants doctrinal clarity, if you're somebody that wants holiness to be set out by all in a coherent way by all levels of church hierarchy, right? The English Reformation ain't gonna be your bag. Right? You're gonna end up Presbyterian or some other kind of Reformed. You're not gonna end up in the Church of England or in any of the Anglican ways of doing church, because ultimately, we're always going to assume that question is a polity question.
Yeah. But even within the Presbyterian and Lutheran traditions, they've been rent asunder by those same questions.
They have, but I think, but again, the ELCA as a national denomination relates very differently to its dioceses than we do. So the Episcopal Church is very progressive. I'm talking about the national church. The Episcopal Church is run by progressives. It is very progressive. Super, super on board with every progressive priority. They are the upholders of progressive bourgeois morality. Right? That is their bag. But the problem is they have no legal authority. They can pass all the resolutions they want. but they have no actual legal authority to force the Bishop of Texas to do anything.
So if a congregation, an individual congregation left the Episcopal Church, it would have to be because they were convicted that continuing fellowship, they wouldn't be forced out. And and they could have their own theology. They could
100%.
probably even withhold funds.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So it would be because they have a personal conviction that fellowship under this rubric going all the way to the Archbishop of Canterbury is itself a scandal.
And let me just say, that happened. That has happened. It happened with the Puritans, right? What you just described is why people came to the United States. Nobody forced them. Nobody was like, hey, you have to come to the United States. They're just like, well, I can't be in fellowship with people who disagree with me about these issues, so I have to go. Yeah. So the Anglican principle always ends up being this kind of cleaving line that separates kinds of Reformed Christians, right? So you're either someone who is not that interested in what the people across the table with you think or do when they're not around you, or you're someone who thinks it's really important.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go back to something just because and maybe I missed this. There's been a lot to take in here. Right now in America, there are Anglican churches and there are Episcopalian churches.
Episcopal churches.
Episcopal churches.
People are Episcopalians.
Oh, okay. Got it. People are Episcopalians.
Episcopal churches with Episcopalians in them.
Okay. Say that 5 times fast. So now what's the difference between those two things? Did I miss that somewhere?
Well, that's what I'm saying is that you live in this paradoxical world where you have Anglican churches that have now taken on the branding of Anglicanism, of Anglican, but they're actually, even though they are Anglican in the sense that they're using a prayer book, they're definitely derived from the Church of England's kind of seed. They are not actually in communion with the Church of England.
Okay.
So that's the complicating factor, right? So you have Episcopalians who I would say both these groups are Anglican, right? Okay. But the people who self-identify as Anglican, having sort of emerged out of the sexuality fights of the aughts, are Anglican in terms of their practice, they're Anglican in terms of their theology and their cultural inheritance, but they are not actually in communion with Canterbury.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it all depends on what you think Anglican should mean to you. Like that connection is important to me, right? I would never leave the Episcopal Church, in part because there's no world in which I would ever be asked to do something that was against my conscience.
That's pretty cool.
Ever.
And if I ever wasn't Lutheran or weren't Lutheran, I would probably be Reformed Episcopal.
Yeah, that was the first. Yeah. That was so. As I said, you got this principle where the Anglican principle tends to separate Puritan has such a loaded term, and I don't mean it disparagingly, but Puritans from Anglicans. Yeah. The Anglican principle always separates them because at some point the Puritans are going to say, I just can't be in the same room with you. Like we disagree about so much that I can't publicly declare myself to be your brother or sister, right?
And like Reformed Episcopalians, they would use the Book of Common Prayer 1928.
They left over the 28 prayer book, right? And
so these are the kind of fights that they, that are had.
Right.
But hey, it's a beautiful prayer book.
Yeah, I love the 28.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was going to ask, I don't know if you were going to close this out or not, but what are just like a couple things that you love about the Episcopal, not Episcopalian, church? Like you're in that, you love it, you're not going to leave. What are some things that like, if people were to come to your church, you're like, you know what I love? It's
one of them is that our way of worshiping, and you really saw this actually embodied in the Queen, we view worship as a solemn duty.
Do you find people when they don't come to church?
No.
I wish I could. For people
Too American for that.
Pew rents, though. We used to have pew rents. You had to pay for your pew. I mean, all churches used to do that.
I do have a favorite pew.
In the 19th century.
Okay, continue.
We view worship as a solemn duty. What that means is that how you feel when you worship is not particularly important. And so that means if you are there and you are saying the words, you are fulfilling your solemn duty.
I kind of like that.
It doesn't matter if you're distracted or if you're grumpy or if you're doubting or if you're angry or you're sad. Your emotions do not factor into whether your solemn duty has been honored or not. And to me,
lovely.
Especially in an emotional evangelical age in which we live, where all of worship is only about how you feel.
To me, there is just such profound freedom in that. When I
Yeah.
first got ordained a priest, I always had this internal worry that I wasn't being present enough to the liturgy as I was conducting it. In other
Yeah.
words, I'm distracted, or I'm worried, or my mind is wandering, or I'm tired, or whatever it was. And I finally got to this place of finally grasping, oh, this isn't about me at all.
That's right.
I am a priest in the church. I'm doing my solemn duty
Mhm.
to conduct the services of divine worship and to proclaim the gospel.
Hmm.
And my job is to do those things,
Yeah.
not to worry about whether it's an authentic reflection of myself right this time at
Yeah.
this moment. Like, those questions don't matter in Anglican polity.
Yeah.
And so that's the same reason why we're able to say, well, you think that this is really important and I don't, but we're going to figure out how to like live in the same church.
Yeah.
Right? That only works because our understanding of why we're doing what we're doing doesn't route through that obsession with self.
Yeah.
And I mean that, with the small s, like,
Mhm.
do I believe? Have I been saved? Have I really gotten on board with this? Have I not? Well, it doesn't matter. If you've been baptized and you're doing the divine office, then you're doing your deal,
Yeah.
what you should be doing.
I like that.
And I find some people find that really because they say, oh, the liturgy is so rote. You say the same things every week. And I'm like, yeah, you do say the same things every week.
And they're still true every week.
Because, dear God, like, why would anybody, like, why would God want us to make up the thing? Like, that's
right.
Like, why would you
Or
ever
pivot
do that?
per our own
Right,
mood.
Right.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And there's a beauty to that kind of formation, and I know that Evan will agree with me as a Lutheran, but the liturgy has this incredible formative power that is subconscious, which is repetition is the building block of all human life.
Mm.
And if you want something to form you, you just have to do it over and over and over and over and over and over again, right?
Mhm.
So I'm to the point in my life now, 15 years into my ministry, lifelong Episcopalian, where there's like a little bean inside my brain, and if you flick that bean, freaking prayer book comes out of it, which is Bible,
Mhm.
right? The prayer book
Mhm.
is just the Bible sort of
Mhm.
blended up, right?
Mhm.
90% of what's in the prayer book, literally 90% is in the Bible.
Hmm.
So what that means is that over the course of my time, little bit, one Sunday at a time, one morning prayer at a time,
Mhm.
that stuff is literally seeped into me.
Yeah.
And not because I've consciously chosen to memorize it, right? It's not about my conscious choice. All I've chosen to do is my duty.
Still, you've hidden the word
Yeah.
in your heart, as they say.
And that's where
That's
I think,
cool.
like Catholics, Anglicans, broad sense, or Episcopalians, Episcopals, and Lutherans are kind of really close cousins in that regard.
Deeply.
Because we are the most liturgical traditions of the West.
Yeah.
Now, that's getting lost. I mean, I have people that come to our church because they drive by 3 other Lutheran churches that do not have the liturgy
Oh,
anymore.
yeah.
But historically, those
yeah.
were things that we did, prize very much. So
It's interesting because everything you said about the solemn duty of worship is the same kind of thing that people, I think, really do crave when it comes to relationships and family, right? That sort of commitment, whether you feel it or not, right?
You
Like, that's what
can't-
makes it work when
You
you're...
can't, and this is maybe a hot take, but you cannot build a functional society around like the authenticity of self,
Right.
because ourselves have no authenticity, right?
I'm reading a book about this right
We're
now.
different selves in every setting because we
Mhm.
don't have any. I mean, God provides us with our coherence. We don't have anything inside of ourselves that coheres naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of any system that prioritizes duty over self
Hmm.
is that it will actually create a stable society.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because you're able to say, whatever is going on inside of me is not where it's at.
Right.
I'm just going to do my deal. And the key thing to say is solemn. That word solemn often implies like funereal, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to mean that, right?
No.
Solemn just means, hey, this is a duty that I take seriously.
It's important.
And that's all it is.
Yeah. I love it. Man.
Well,
I
not
feel
only
inspired.
not only did we talk history, but we did a lot of application, probably more application than others. But that's great. I think it was really
Yeah.
interesting because the history has stayed with the Anglican tradition wherever it's been found, through the years, and I think that was really fascinating. So, if you want to, learn more about Anglicanism, Episcopalianism, Episcopalism, find Rector Patrick Hall, Church of the Epiphany, southwest side of Houston. What's your website?
Epiphany-hou.org.
Cool.
But you can find out everything you need about him and all the other leaders, including where to find him, on the leadership page of our website. HoustonTOT.com has like a little blurb about Patrick's beliefs and all the contact information.
Yeah. And if you like this series, or if you have an idea for a future series that we might tackle in a bunch, something that we'll research, something that we'll bring to you in a whole bundle package of podcasts, let us know. You can find us at HoustonTOT.com. Well, anyway, for Sarah, I'm Evan. Thanks for listening. Until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.